Good morning.
All right. With that, I'm going to go ahead and get started. I'm not going to mute the lines, and then that way, if you want to interrupt and ask questions as we go along, I think that's fine. We'll keep it pretty casual. But if you're doing other stuff and want to mute your own phone, that's fine. So just to get started, I think most everyone has heard me talk about the Volkswagen Trust Funds at board meetings, but I just wanted to make sure that everyone kind of remembered the background on this. So when Volkswagen cheated on their air emissions for their vehicles, there was a settlement, and so each state got money from Volkswagen that had to go towards reducing NOx emissions from mobile sources. So within the state of Missouri, the Missouri Department of Natural Resources was the one that kind of took a hold of the planning process and held a lot of public meetings that many of you attended, and came up with a draft plan as well as an implementation plan. So they've been taking comments along the way. MPUA has been involved in all of the meetings, and so what they have out now that you can go to their website, I put a link there for you, that you can go to the website and read over that implementation plan. Or if you just go to dnr.mo.gov and then type Volkswagen into the search box, then this page will pop up. And then if you go into Read Missouri's draft plan, you can see both the plan of where they're going to spend the money, but then also how those funds are going to be implemented. Before we get into the electric vehicle part of it, I did want everyone to know that there might be some ways for your communities to also take advantage of some of the other money that's been for certain areas. For instance, government trucks, there's $6 million that's going towards that. And so that might be something of use to you that have fleet vehicles. Those are basically from 1992 to 2009. There are a certain amount of that money that's going to be set aside for the St. Louis or Kansas City area, but there's also some statewide money that will go towards that. And basically, it needs to go for a vehicle that is going to be fueled by either an alternative fuel or by an electric vehicle. The maximum amount is $1 million. However, in the implementation plan, if you have some cost share funds that you can put in there, then you will be scored higher. And if they don't use all the funding, then they'll kind of just put it back in the pot. And so, for instance, if it's non-St. Louis and Kansas City people do not take advantage of this, then that money would be released statewide. And then some of the other ones that some cities might be interested in is the transit and shuttle buses, non-governmental trucks, local and locomotive and marine, as well as airport funding. And so that's just kind of a summary overall of what is going to be in there, as well as the electric funds, which comes in at $6 million. So with that, Pat, if you're ready, I'm going to go ahead and share the screen and let you get started, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's great. I guess maybe I'd offer out, are there any questions so far before we dive into just the electric vehicle portion?
JT Hardy, City of Sullivan, I have a question. Is there a difference between this VW Trust, or is there a similarity, I should say, between the VW Trust and Electrify America?
Yes, there is a difference. Although it all comes from the same funding source, which is Volkswagen. Part of the penalty to Volkswagen was you're going to provide, a couple of $1 billion to the states to do what they want with the money within the categories that Connie just went over. And also, you will spend another couple of billion, I don't know the exact number, helping develop charging infrastructure and raising awareness throughout the country. And so Electrify gets to control that money. They can use it to try to set up profitable charging. They cannot use it in conjunction with VW to try to raise VW's market share.
The reason I ask is because they're planning on building one in our community. They've been working on it for several months, and I just didn't know if I should still be on the call or if it's the same thing or not.
It's separate, so we're going to talk about that, and I'm going to show something about the Electrify.
Right.
In a quick answer, what they're putting up is not really enough to electrify our state, and so we are going to address where Electrify is going in the call. But thanks. Okay. Can you see my screen yet, Connie?
Yes.
And is it the right side, or do I need to flip it?
Flip it. You're in presenter mode.
How's that look?
That's good. Can everyone see it all right?
Can anyone not see it? Who's trying to? Okay, then I'm going to proceed. This is essentially the same presentation with a couple of very minor updates that our Missouri EV Collaborative, it's an informal group of the folks you see on or the companies and organizations you see on the slide right now, pulled together to present a vision for, well, two things. One was a letter was sent in generally that covers a lot of the categories and recommends to Missouri DNR, who is in charge of the VW money, as Connie said, to put a lot of emphasis on electrification because it has a lot of benefits, and we're going to talk about some of those here. So this group, we had several phone calls, pulled together a letter of support and also a plan, a high-level plan, really more of a vision for what we could do in Missouri to help solve the long-distance charging and raise awareness of electric vehicles in our state. So why Ameren? First of all, my work here at Ameren, Missouri, is almost 100% focused on trying to develop the marketplace for electric vehicles and engage our customers on this, get our system set up so that we are ready for what's coming, but also to encourage it to come. And there's three primary reasons for that. The first is environmental. Fortunately, this is a win for the environment, even in our fossil fuel-based state, because these vehicles are so efficient and because of the scrubbing that we have on equipment, there's almost 50% less NOx on a comparable EV to a gas vehicle. And that gets greener all the time as utilities are adding more renewables to the system. And then another environmental benefit is the zero emissions at ground level, which I think is often understated. When you think about the emissions at ground level where people are, well, driving, ironically, as well as walking, working, living in buildings, it's kind of nice to take that away and have the emissions be in a more concentrated area or none at all through renewables. And so there's some real benefits there on the environmental front. One that tends to drive the business decisions even more is the economics. These vehicles have less maintenance, they are simpler, many less moving parts. Refueling, this slide was developed that says half the cost of petroleum when gas was $2.25 a gallon. So it's roughly $1 a gallon equivalent. Depending on, and that's at 10 cents a kilowatt hour rate if you're charging at home. So it's much less expensive than current costs or even lower costs on petroleum. Most folks feel that less petroleum dependence is a good thing generally due to the international impacts. And then off-peak charging and grid benefits. This is really key for us at Ameren, Missouri, and maybe for your utilities as well. These vehicles there's evidence that shows that they are mostly charging off-peak. Even though it makes sense that folks would come home and charge at 5 or 6 o'clock after work, and plug in and start charging, the data that we've seen in studies shows that most of the charging is happening off-peak. There are also things we can do through programs to encourage even more off-peak, and studies have shown those are very effective programs. For example, if you give somebody a little bit more break on the rate, you can get them to move well into your lowest points of the night. And the vehicles and the charging equipment are such that this is pretty easy to do, even without any sophisticated two-way communication. And then finally, the driver experience. If you haven't driven an electric vehicle yet, I would highly recommend you do it. And I'm not just talking about a hybrid electric. This is a plug-in hybrid electric or a battery electric. They are very responsive. Even the Nissan Leaf, we have a few of those in our fleet here, and I have one at home, and it's a pretty remarkable car. It won me over when I test drove one here at the office. Very responsive, very quiet, and surprisingly powerful. So given that these vehicles are so great, there are barriers to their adoption. You don't see them proliferating, especially in our territory. Even in California, they're not a huge part of the market share yet. But we want to help bring that forward faster because of all the benefits we just discussed. This is pretty obvious, but battery technology and electric vehicles are developing very rapidly. There's some consensus out there that the breakthrough electric vehicle for mainstream drivers will have a 300-mile range for less than 30,000. And this car, a Chevy Bolt EV, starts to get close to that. It's 37,500. With federal tax credit, it's down to 30,000. But we need it to be at 30,000 without a tax credit. So it's got a ways to go, but it's getting there. This car has a 238-mile all-electric range. This car has no engine. It's just a pure battery. It's got a 60 kilowatt-hour battery pack. For you to even consider this vehicle, which could make, a pretty long trip, if it could go over 300 miles with one refueling in between that would be reasonable, you could take this car today, say 400 miles across Missouri, but you would need to refuel it halfway. And the problem is there just is not much charging out there, and I'm going to show that in just a moment. So one of the barriers that we have is long distance charging. So what we need is DC fast charging for quick refueling on corridors. And that quick probably should be in quotes right now. We'll talk about what quick means. Here's today's DC fast charging. And just so you all know, if you're not familiar, for level 1 and level 2 charging, which are AC charging, where you plug in level 1, you plug into a wall outlet. Level 2, you've got a 240 volt or 208 volt supply to the charger. It provides AC to the car, and that transformation to DC happens under the hood. There's a transformer in the car. So that pushes DC into the battery, but at a fairly slow rate. It's anywhere from 5 miles of range in an hour up to 25 miles of range for an hour of charge. So on a trip, for your day-to-day commute, level 1 or 2 is fine at home or even at your workplace. But if you're on a trip, you need something much faster. And we have really nothing available across Missouri from west of St. Louis to just east of Kansas City. And then the site shown in the southwest corner is actually in Arkansas. Now, if you go look at a map today at PlugShare or ChargePoint or one of these websites that shows charging, or even the government has a nice website to show alternative fuels availability on our highways, you are going to see some, but those are Tesla chargers, and they're proprietary. They're only available to Tesla owners. So Tesla recognized they had to solve the long distance charging before they would sell a lot of vehicles. and they've essentially done that. Any questions so far? I'm going to get into more details of this, but if there's something about this map or the benefits or the barrier, okay, then I'll move on. What we proposed in the document that we sent to DNR was that we work on a statewide minimum practical network for charging. And what that means is that it's not an experiment any longer for you to say, I want to go from Kirksville to Springfield or St. Louis to Kansas City or, you know, southeast to northwest. You know you'll be able to make it. And that means some redundancy, both at any particular site, so at least 2 DC fast chargers, as well as we're recommending some level 2 charging. And that there are multiple sites along your route. So between Kansas City and St. Louis, there's not just one site in Columbia, but there are, you know, 3 or 4 spots where you could stop along the highway. And that's what we consider practical, where you have a few choices so you can time it based on your type of vehicle, when you need to refuel, when you want to have lunch or dinner or stretch your legs. Use the restroom, just kind of how you drive now, except this would be a minimum network. Now, right now you drive across the state and there's lots of options for gasoline. We don't feel like as this collaborative we need to solve it and make that much available, but a minimum practical network so that it encourages those that are considering EVs to know that they can travel in their own state at least, or get from one end to the other, and not have that be a barrier when they're considering buying one. Now, the minimum of 2 DC fast chargers, they need to be at least 50 kilowatt, but we're starting to gravitate towards 150 kilowatt output. Even though the cars being produced today cannot take that. Even a Tesla, I believe, takes 120 kilowatt max. The future holds that the automakers are building EVs, planning them, and actually starting to build them on the high-end cars to take much higher input of charging. So a 150 kilowatt charger will actually charge, you know, my Leaf that only takes 50 kilowatt, because it communicates with the car to determine the rate, but it could also ramp up all the way to 150 for the cars produced a few years from now. So we don't want these to become obsolete and want them to be able to charge cars of the future. So we're leaning more towards the 150 kilowatt output. We'll talk about Electrify America. They're already looking at 350 kilowatt output machines. Not all of them at their stations that they're going to be putting out, but at those stations, there would be 350 kilowatt available. CHAdeMO and CCS combo connectors. Unfortunately, the auto industry has not standardized fast charging. They have standardized level 2 charging, but not for level 3 fast charging. So right now you would have to have 2 different connectors on there so you could serve both GM, Ford, VW cars, BMW, as well as Nissan and Mitsubishi and others that use the CHAdeMO connection. At some point, we expect those, there would be a standard, but right now there's not. And then I mentioned level 2 ports. We'd like to have level 2 ports there because all electric vehicles on the road today, unless it's a do-it-yourselfer vehicle that you know, just didn't include level 2 charging. Anything that's made commercially has a level 2 port. You can buy that Chevy Bolt EV without a fast charging port, but it would at minimum have the level 2 port. So just for safety purposes and to make sure everybody can charge, we would want to put level 2 ports in as well, even though that's not really a very practical option for long distance travel. The other reason to have level 2 there is that we want to put these charging islands in communities near the highway so that there's awareness building within that community. So for example, a rest area is not a good location, but somewhere at an intersection where there's amenities and things to do for the driver while they wait. And I should have, well, I've got a slide I think next that shows the charging rates and the times. These would take credit card input. They may also allow for some kind of membership for charging. Spacing's 25 to 75 miles apart. The initial map I'm going to show you has communities with populations of 2,000 or greater. Of course, near interstates and multi-lane highways. We expect we can get no cost easements for these at this point, since it would be considered to prospective host sites an amenity, something that they can show that they've got more to offer. And then we want utility grade reliability and make sure these are available. Since it would be a minimum practical network, it's really critical that this infrastructure is working. So this is how we started finding developing a draft map of where charging should go. What you see here is a DOT map that shows vehicle count, like traffic count for different roadways. So we looked at this and set up 3 different priority levels for charging islands. The first is along interstates, number 1. That's the most long distance travel. Second priority would be multi-lane highways in our state having 10,000 daily trips or more between communities. And then third would be less than 10,000 daily trips. And again, these are in, we used a mapping program to identify the right granularity or the right spread of cities. And it was about 2,000 or greater gave us communities that were between 25 and 75 miles apart that we could choose to start laying out the network. So that's a total of 40 islands across the state, 24 on interstates, 10 on multi-lane heavy, and 6 on multi-lane light. You start to see the map below on the right. Here is the approximate cost per island, a range of $170,000 to $240,000 for if they have 50 kilowatt charging. A 50 kilowatt charger will get you about 150 miles of range in 1 hour. So now with 150 kW, you could get 450 miles of range in an hour. So you can see why that is much more attractive in the long run. If there will be vehicles in the next 3 to 5 years that would be able to take a higher charge like that, and this equipment we expect would last 10 years, then we'd probably want to go ahead and do 150 if possible. However, the cost is more. The equipment is more, the line extension would be more as it's heftier cable. When we get to 150 kilowatt charging, these machines have liquid cooled cables. And so the equipment gets a bit more complex. So the total development cost to do 40 islands is in the ballpark of $6.8 million to $14.4 million. So you can see even if DNR applies the full $6 million as they have in their draft plan so far, we're waiting to get the final plan, as Connie said, but the draft plan has the full $6 million. That's not enough to cover this network. So that's why we're here talking, and or one of the reasons we need to talk about how can we work together to make this vision happen. These are factors that go into that range of costs. The rate of the equipment is a piece of it, line extension cost and complexity, location of the site and getting construction crew to the site, and then just the complexity of the development, how much work needs to be done to set these up, in site work, traffic flow and all that. So here's the draft or proposed charging station locations. Again, I want to stress that this is draft, okay? This is sites where I put some dots on the map based on what we talked about. I talked with the EV Collaborative about it. We made some adjustments, but this is not a detailed, this is, these sites have not been visited to see if they're really suitable. Also, the dots represent the type of utility. So the 3 investor owns are Ameren red, KCPL dark blue, Empire or Liberty the green. And then we have co-ops as gray and municipals as light blue. You know, you all probably know well that you just shift the dot a little bit and it could be a different territory. So we also need to explore do we have this right as far as which utility owns that territory. These 40 islands would be reduced once we have full knowledge of where Electrify is going. One gentleman spoke that he knows that one's going in his territory. I believe we've got some others that have been engaged, including Ameren. I know there's one in our territory in Missouri. And so DNR, what we first proposed was that we would avoid those sites because we're looking for the minimum practical network and we don't need to duplicate. What we want is to build this minimum practical network, not duplicate in one area yet. So if there's an Electrify site going in a community, we would probably, we would propose to DNR, and they're expecting us to say we wouldn't put one of these DNR subsidized or granted sites in that same location. I'm going to talk more about that in just a minute. Any questions about this map so far? I think I saw somebody had a question about, can you get the map? Yes, we can send this presentation out to you. We could also send the plan that we gave to DNR that has some more narrative on it, an explanation like I'm describing. I see a note popping up. You can see it fine. You can absolutely share this. This is all public record. And it's on DNR's website. I think they've shared the presentation and the plan, if I recall right. But we'll definitely make sure Connie can directly get this out to you.
We can send that out later. And yeah, you can go in and I think you can even look at what MPUA wrote, what other cities wrote, and all the comments about the plan as well.
Anything else about either the map or the charging equipment?
One other thing that I would probably add was that, you know, when we were working on the map, part of it was also making sure that there was a balance between investor-owned utilities, municipally owned utilities. There's some co-ops on there. The co-ops decided not to join the collaborative and put their name on it, but what we did try to do is still keep it pretty balanced. So as you're looking at the map, you can kind of see that not only is it balanced in distance for the driver, but also amongst the utilities as well.
Okay, that's right. And so while the co-ops did not yet sign on, their association, they are interested. So we'll be doing some follow-up with them as well, because there are several key sites, especially down south and you know, peppered around that are really important, I think, and that VW or that Electrify America won't be covering. And the goal of this is to make it viable for everyone, not just the urban dwellers. Let's make this work for everyone, because all those benefits can accrue to any of our utilities, I believe, as well as to our shared environment and the consumers that really will enjoy the vehicles if they can it can be a practical option for them. If there aren't any questions, I'll pause one more time and then I'll head into what we see the next steps are, what we told DNR, and talk a little bit about what DNR has told us. Anything more is right now? Okay, just checking our time. Looks like we're good. Okay, so what we told DNR back in December, and this is before they finished their draft, was if the plan is well received by DNR, then we would formalize the expectations and establish a DNR air pollution control program, the APCP, approved oversight plan. I actually talked with DNR after the draft came out, and I said, well, we're going to send some more comments in because after the draft, they asked for comments and took those until I think May 4th. And the comments reflected, I guess, the next level of thinking about how to formalize this and how do we move forward. And what we said in those comments from the collaborative was that we would suggest that we form a couple levels of working teams. One would include DNR and any other state agency oversight and a few members of the EV collaborative. And then we would also have an EV working group that's actually working on the nitty-gritty planning, getting bids, communicating like we are today, and then reporting up so that we don't have too large of a group and slow things down too much. But we need good communication at the working group. That's what's going to be really critical for pulling off a good plan. And we haven't seen in the final draft if they like the way we suggested that they manage this. So it's all oversight by DNR and potentially partner agencies if they feel the need, and then working group, which would involve many utilities helping make this happen. So we would also, with that working group, identify the specific locations, figure out who the utility is for each site, determine funding distribution and cost sharing. So best case is we have $6 million to work with. And that would need to be spread based on, trying to make the whole vision happen. I guess let me back up. Another piece would be by end of this year, and we probably could just have a frank conversation and find out where's VW going. I know they're putting NDAs in place. We have one with them, and they may have one with your utility. At some point, we may need to ask for their permission to just start talking about this together as a group and shave those sites, which would shave the cost overall. That should be a good thing. There may be opportunity to collaborate on sourcing materials or services. Since we all have different utility models, the way these could be managed could be different. Our investor-owned utilities so far have been told that we can't make this electric vehicle charging part of our normal business model and own and operate this equipment. It's going to have to be third-party owned. However, Ameren, Missouri has a proposal at the commission right now that includes incentives for EV charging. So the 10 red dots that are on there now, assuming they stay about 10, we would fund through the mechanisms that are in the proposal that has yet to be approved. We hope to have approval by the end of the year or early next year. If we get that approval, that's how we would fund our portion. And so what we would ask today is for you to go back and figure out if you really want to be engaged on this, and if you guys could be, lead utilities in your areas to try to make, one or more of these islands happen, depending on your territory.
And if I can interject here, Pat, also a particular site that might be beneficial too. So, for instance, if the city has any land that they can use near the highway, that's a good spot. That would be good to know as well.
Yeah, and once we know who really wants to be engaged on this and thinks they can make it work, and that means both some time commitment, as well as either ownership on your part and maintaining it, or oversight, so that if it's a third party like we would have at Ameren, we would command some oversight on these highway chargers to make sure contractually that we would make sure that the teeth are in the contract to make sure that they are up and running properly. And so we could pull back together and start talking about what makes a good site once we know who really wants to learn more and get engaged on this. So what we told DNR was that we would need, from the time they let us know that this was going to be funded, we would need at least 6 to 9 months to do more detailed design, and then once we had design, 12 to 18 months for construction. There's a few reasons for that. It seems maybe like it's long, but since we're coordinating across our territory boundaries and trying to get some benefit by collaborating, that takes longer than just going out to do it. If we collaborate on a bid process, that complicates it. And then the construction, ordering equipment, there could be some backlogs because Electrify America is going to take up a lot of equipment over their next couple of years as they build out the first area. Here's a map of where Electrify America is going. If you go to electrifyamerica.com, you can scroll or look at their plan and scroll down and see, you can see this map without the state boundaries on it. I had our GIS, one of our GIS guys, overlay a US map the best he could, and this is what he came up with. And so you can see for Missouri, we've got, 6 or 7 in their draft plan, and you can kind of eyeball where those cities may be. And of course, if you're a utility that has one, you probably already know because they've reached out. So if we have 6 or 7, that would reduce our costs by, potentially a couple of $1 million, which should be a good thing. And in case you're not up to speed, the cities that you see listed, there's 17 of them. Those are cities where Electrify has committed to put in a lot of metro area charging and do a lot of awareness building and try to drive markets for purchase of electric vehicles. Again, it has to be void of Volkswagen marketing, just general. So this is similar to like what you would see in a Tesla map. And it's a great start, but it doesn't cover our entire state. So we're back to, we want to build this vision out. So any questions about this?
Well, and one clarification too, some of these other funding categories where the VW settlement money went to, like the school buses and government trucks and that type of thing, they're a little bit more straightforward, so that money is going to be available sooner. But like Pat said, this collaborative group needs to kind of work through some of the details. So I think it was, you said either summer or fall of 2019, Pat, is when you're kind of expecting that work would be wrapped up and that.
Yeah, I think DNR will, once they get the program, first we have to have the final plan. I see there's one question on when will DNR have their final plan. We don't know. It should be any day. I've talked to DNR leadership in the past few weeks, and they said, we're still working on it. We're very close, but they wouldn't let me know when they think it'll happen. But it could be any day. I see another question about how about Hannibal, Abraham and Jared. If you have a proposed site on here, and I guess first of all, if you have a proposed site and you know Electrify is coming, and you're good with that, then that's great. With Electrify being there, and we would probably, we would propose to not have a dot in that area. If we've got a dot in an area and that's your territory and Electrify is coming in, but it's not real close to that, it's 25 miles or more away, then let's talk and or you just feel really strongly like you want to be part of this and set up your own island, then let's talk and see if it makes sense to put it there. It's probably going to come down to, first, what do we think makes sense given limited funds, and second, what does DNR think? If you're excited about one, say Hannibal, and you want to get involved, I guess what I would ask you to do is take this back to your teams and leadership and determine if you can be involved, if you see these benefits the way we do at Ameren, and could you help fund one of these and either own it and manage it or just manage it, but help make it happen. One of the reasons, even for third party, one of the reasons we're involved in doing this, I didn't cover it. I guess I sort of did with the map where there's no charging. What I should have said was we talked to 5 different charging station developers for highway type charging. They all said they're not coming to Missouri. There's a chicken and egg here, and they don't have the funding or the business model that'll make this work. We're hopeful that if we basically incentivize them for virtually the whole thing to get set up, that then they can make it work. In these early years, there won't be many vehicles charging there. So you don't have the strong case for the need right now. It's building it so that the need starts coming more because there's so many benefits to having more electric vehicles on the system. And so if you're interested in doing this, and we hope you are, then go back to leadership and reach back out to, I guess, Connie and me to let us know, and we can start working on next steps to include you. And if you know you're not interested, then it would be great to know that as well, and maybe have a discussion on why. Maybe you're on the fence and need to know more, and that's great. We can do some follow-up discussion.
Yeah, and especially one thing that I thought about, Pat, that is different for Ameren is that all of our cities are going to have different budget years as well. And yes. So if you're getting ready for your 2019 budget, or depending on where you are in the process with that, we can go back and kind of figure out, like, okay, you're scheduled to have this type of charging station, the approximate cost is this, and if you want to move something forward, maybe have a placeholder in the budget, then I can certainly help you with that, and we can bring Pat in as well, as far as just if you're working on your budgets and need some money and want to be involved.
Mm-hmm.
Then I think we had one more question, and Pat, you probably are better source for this. How are other utilities dealing with rate structures for charging stations with KW versus KWH?
Good question. And it varies by utility and how much constraint they have and how high their demand charges are. When we talked to these charging station developers, they brought up demand charges as a major concern. They mostly operate in California and on the coast, where demand charges tend to be a bit higher, actually a lot higher. When they saw our rates, they were less concerned, but it still is a difficulty for the developer to deal with this demand that gets set. So let's say they only have a couple charging events in a day, and they don't sell many kilowatt hours, but they set that demand up there at, say a Tesla comes by and sets the demand at 120. Well, that can be problematic. I think it's something we're going to have to work through together, each utility with its own potential approach. Right now, we don't have any special EV rates in Ameren, Missouri, and we're not expecting to for the corridor charging. We're going to learn something through this as we engage developers and offer that incentive to get set up. We do feel like we need to keep the cost of the demand in place, because it's true that it's there. There are ways to reduce demand at peak times through these machines. There's some intelligence that can be incorporated and limit demand. Another approach is to give the corridors EV charging a break if you have the political appetite for it. I don't think we do it in Missouri, at Ameren, Missouri, at this point, and with our commission and regulators. But it's a good question. It's something we're going to be working through together. We wouldn't have to have the same rates at every charging island, though some trying to set it reasonably close is probably a good idea.
Connie, this is Rodney and Rolla. So I just want to make sure I kind of understand this. So we've got money from DNR, maybe maybe some matching type money that may come from a Ameren or a city co-op, etc., to construct it. Then you'd have a third party that would be actually taking the credit card payments and paying the electric bill for this charging station, kind of managing it. And then the utility would just be making sure we had utility grade power to that facility and maybe some minor maintenance. Do I kind of understand that right?
Well, yes, that's one possibility. So it depends on your utility, on how you want to do it. It could be that your utility says, well, we're good to own and operate this, we'll keep it up, we'll get a maintenance contract on it, and we'll keep it rolling, and because you're allowed to own and operate it. Investor owns really aren't at this point allowed to in their normal business model. So we won't own and operate these in Ameren's territory. They would be third party owned and operated, but with a special contract that gives us some teeth and understanding that, if they either fail as a business, then we're not going to let that equipment just idle. We're going to get it up and running somehow.
Okay.
Yeah, and from what I can tell, and Kara and Eric and some either Frank or Jane from Columbia might be able to hop in here too, but it seems like there's some public power utilities across the United States that got in really early and they own their own equipment, and now they're kind of backing off and they're going to a vendor having all of that equipment for them. And I'm not quite sure what Springfield, Columbia, and Independence has been looking at. If you guys wanted to weigh in on whether you've found one model better than the other.
This is Frank with the City of Columbia. Right now, Connie, we don't have a model, so we're still trying to figure that out.
Yeah.
This is Kara with Springfield. I'll echo Frank. We don't really have a plan. We do have a couple charging stations that we did with partnership with the city, but everything else is basically privately owned, and we're working on some time of use rates as well.
Okay, that's good to know.
Again, this is Rodney, and maybe I'm getting out ahead of kind of the thoughts, but is it possible that this could be I guess from the municipal side, kind of and it may be pie in the sky, but more of a standardized layout plan so that, these could be group purchased, for lack of a better word, dropped in on identified sites in 10 cities or whatever, however identified towns we have, and then just use possibly using one third-party administrator to just take care of it once they're up and going. It seems like that would be rather than every city, and maybe I'll exclude Columbia and Independence and Springfield, but for the rest of us, it seems like it would make sense to try and do this as very much a collaborative effort where each one of us is not trying to reinvent the wheel and how this thing's going to work.
Yeah, and I think that's something that Pat had put in the proposal as far as things that we need to work with DNR over the next year as far as, okay, would it make sense for us all to go with third party, especially if the investor owns already do anyway? And it might be, there's some good things about having those similar charging stations as far as maintenance contracts and all that type of thing. That might be a good way to go. Pat, do you have anything?
No, I think it's a great comment. I think you're thinking right along the same lines that we have been, that there are some benefits to working together. It could be that depending on budgets or timing, it makes it easier or harder, but yeah, instead of having every city go out on its own, it makes sense to do a group RFP or a group ability to buy through that RFP, One of the challenges, though, that I want to make sure people understand is this is a quote I heard from one of the developers, every site is a snowflake. So you can generally have the same basic design, but each site, each parking lot has its own peculiarities that make it a little bit different. So the approximate cost just for the equipment can be the same, but the line extension will vary, the concrete, make ready, that you're working with, that you have to develop with the owner of the real estate can vary. And so there will be differences in the design of each site. There's going to need to be some professional design at each site to do this properly.
Right. Yeah, I would understand that. I was just trying to just the basic operating parameters would be helpful for us to do that on a group-wide basis. But yeah, you're right that every site's going to be a little bit different where you come in, where you leave, how much site development it's going to take. But okay.
Yeah. It also makes sense for if utilities aren't going to get the training to maintain this equipment. I think it makes sense that there's a lot of overlap on the maintenance contracts as well. And we may not want to go statewide with one vendor. We may want to have 2 or 3 so that we have some backup in case one of them goes under. This is still a relatively new industry. There's startups happening, and we want to make sure that it's sustainable. But I like what you're saying. That makes a lot of sense.
Well, and one thing as far as timing and budgets, if you are getting some money from the state, then, it could be maybe a special appropriation. If it doesn't fit into your regular scheduled budget season, then it might be, since there's some money coming in, that you could get it approved as a special expenditure once we know more of what's going to be the format of how DNR is going to handle this money and roll it out to different sites. So, but yeah, I guess, Pat, the main takeaways are, let me know, let Connie know if you're in or you're out. If you're in, if you have any comments or would like to be part of the DNR process as we go along, let us know that as well. What else, Pat? Anything?
Yeah, I would say including on the fence that you're real interested, but we know leadership may have to make some decisions or consult. If you are the leader that makes the decision, you want to consult with others. And also if you, rather than silence, just if you're not interested or you think you've got to electrify, so you won't need to pursue this right now.
Connie, Pat and Connie. Go ahead.
Sorry. Connie, this is Chad Narola. Just one quick suggestion. I think we've talked about it just a moment and there's no solution to it yet, I'm sure, but at some point in time, there'll need to be some signage on the interstate, highways, whatever, to point folks to these things, because presumably they're not going to all be readily visible right off the interstate. And maybe whether MoDOT's going to help with that, whether DNR funds will help with that to put those signs up. And I guess what I'm thinking is to use that as leverage with local businesses for sites and stuff like that says, hey, there's going to be a sign on the interstate that points traffic your direction, and you may not have to pay for it. And I don't know how we leverage that help, but as a possibility.
Yeah, that's a good idea, and that's something important, I think, to bring up during the meetings with DNR as they figure out how they're going to roll this out, because not only signs on the highway, but is there a good, app that we could go with and make sure that those sites are put on an app that people commonly use as they're traveling across the United States or the state?
Yeah, there's a very popular app right now called PlugShare. I'd recommend you take a look at. There are others, but that's primarily where EV drivers go to find charging right now. We have been in touch with MoDOT and the federal standards on EV charging. It doesn't get its own sign. It gets it's like, is it E85 maybe, is on the leg of the sign, and so they've got an EV or a EV charging icon that or logo they can put on the leg of the sign. But we have been in touch with them, so we'll definitely do that follow-up. But I guess I would tell you that apps is the way people will find this stuff, and most EVs have a screen that they can also look for charging on the little display. But there is opportunity for the local host site to get a little bit of business from it.
Mm-hmm.
Frank, this is Frank. Yeah, this is Frank with Columbia. I had a question. On Pat's presentation, you had a variation in the size of the charging stations and what it would cost per charging station. And there's potential $6 million from DNR, but is there any, like if somebody's trying to work on their budget, what numbers should we be looking at as far as throwing into budget requests for a charging station?
Yeah, so this number that's in front of you now for the 150, 270,000 to 360,000 is all in. So that's line extension, make-ready work with concrete, the charging equipment, the design. It does not include like costs if you had to buy real estate. I'm assuming free easements again, but it includes everything you need to build a site. Does that answer the question, Frank?
Yeah, pretty much. So
that's
that
if you go ahead. I'm sorry.
Of that $270,000 to $360,000, how much of that would the DNR funds cover?
Well, the first thing we would do is figure out where's Electrify going, and how many of those sites we're avoiding. So let's say they have 7 sites in the state that match up to where we're putting want to put charging. Then we'd be down to 33. So we've just taken 7 out of 40, like a sixth of it away or something.
You get 6. So it's like a 60 share.
Yeah, so we'd work hard to keep it closer to the 270, but this is an important point that we have to collaborate on together. Is where does the
20,000?
Where does the subsidy go from DNR? And so we just have to have a discussion on how do we apply that. Are there critical places where the utility just can't get involved? And so we need, as a collaborative, to say, well, we need to put more funding at that site because it's critical, or do we just make it, put it evenly?
In your state, in your town.
Yeah.
Somebody's not muted, and you're coming in.
Yeah. Oh. Sorry, that was us.
That's okay. Glad to hear your engagement. That's awesome. Frank, does that answer it for you?
Yes, thanks, Pat.
Yeah, so, I guess what you could do is just, like Pat said, there might be some Electrify America spots to take out, but knowing that, we're getting $6 million, you could divide that in half, or like I said, it is kind of tricky, but I think you could probably do some pretty good estimating depending on which highway you're along and what type of charging station, and knowing that, hopefully you would get some matching funds.
Yeah, doing some quick calcs, if we had 33 sites, that's 11.9 million at 360,000. So 6 million divided by 33 is 181,000 a site. So that if it was all even, that would be the subsidy per site. Now, from the 6 million, DNR will take some administrative percentage, I expect. They have committed to minimizing that admin costs, but will be somewhat less than 6 if we get the full thing. But I think knowing that you've got this, 360,000 max, and then maybe assume that you can have at least, if we do get 6 million, $100,000 reduction. So it's 260 now. It may be less than that, hopefully, but we just don't know yet. And then a site, you know, we'd rather have a site in at 50 kilowatts than not in at all. So if the cost is really the driving factor, maybe we could go with lower power equipment. But, okay, I think we're at time though, so we're a little bit over. So I'll look forward to follow up with any of you that want to learn more and be engaged on this. And I appreciate Connie setting this up.
Yeah, and I'll definitely send out the presentation as well as just a PDF of that map separately so you can zoom in and see it a little bit better. If you can think of anything else, have any other questions, or just want to, like I said, touch base with me and let me know whether you think you're in or out. That would be fantastic, and look for more information as we get it. All right, with that,
All right, bye-bye.
all right, everyone, bye-bye.